Well, good morning, everybody. Oh, we're not there yet. We haven't let them in.
They're coming in now.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to see you all coming on. I'm Cindy Lair, and I'm the program manager for the Colorado State Conservation Board and through the Department of Agriculture. We got a lot of people kind of cycling in right now, so I'm just giving it a moment for people to get on and to get situated. While we're getting situated, would you please put your name and your conservation district or eligible entity affiliation in the box, in the chat box? That would be great. And we'll know who all is on. So again, I'm Cindy Lair, and I am very happy to see you all and to introduce our team that's been working so hard for this very day to do this training, to get all of you up to speed so that you can go out and meet with some of your landowners to get them involved in the soil health program that your conservation district is leading. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce this very hardworking team. First, I'm going to introduce Ryan Taylor, who is the Soil Health Program Coordinator. Along with that is Nikki Brinson, who is our District Operations Manager. Both of them have worked really hard to get things going. And then from our very high-ranking all-star team, I want to introduce from the ground up consulting team is Helen Silver and also Max Newmeyer. They've been with us lockstep through the entire process of setting this program up. So we're really excited, all five of us, to work with you today and to get this program off and running, and so that you know what you're supposed to do. We know that it's not absolutely perfect, and we know you're going to have questions. We're going to have ways for you to be able to get more information along the way. But so please don't worry, but we'll use your time as good as we can today. I also want to let you know that Eva Stricker, who's from the Quivira Coalition, will be joining us a little bit later, probably about 9:30. But I'm going to hand it over to Max, who's going to do the next part of our welcome and overview.
Great, thank you so much. I just wanted to preview the agenda for the training today. From 9 to 9:30, we have our welcome. Ryan Taylor is going to give a program overview, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what I'm talking about right now. Then we'll hear from Nikki about the program workflow, the paperwork, the logistics of how this program is going to run. At tentatively 10 o'clock, we're going to have Eva Stricker from the Quivira Coalition join us to walk through the Soil Health Guidebook. It would be good for you to have that in front of you today. Nikki emailed everyone with a copy of that this morning. So between now and 10, if you could find a copy of that, have it on your desktop. So when Eva refers to it, you'll know what she's talking about. We'll have a break from 10:45 to 11. Part 2 of the Soil Health Guidebook presentation will occur after that. From 11:45 to 12:30, we'll hear about these STAR consultations and an overview in more detail of the STAR program. We have lunch scheduled for 12:30 to 1. We regret we can't be doing this in person and seeing you all over lunch, but that will be a chance for you to grab a bite. For 1 to 1:45, we will talk about the technical assistance aspect of this program. That will be led by Helen and Ryan. 1:45 to 2:30, I will talk about the program structure, the different partners that are working on this project, and go through the calendar for the upcoming year. We'll end the day with breakout rooms by grant. We hope this will be an opportunity for folks to ask more specific questions that might not be appropriate for the whole group in a smaller setting, so we can get all your questions answered. We'll close out at 3 o'clock. We may go more quickly than this, so if we do, we'll change things around and adjust as needed. I also want to mention that this is not the end of training folks to run this program. We're going to be having 2 in-person trainings. One is going to be held at Chatfield Farms on the Front Range on March 29th. And another will be held on March 31st, tentatively in Montrose. And so on March 29th and March 31st, those will be opportunities to learn more about the soil sampling and monitoring aspects of this project and get to know each other in person. So there may well be other recordings or trainings virtually between now and then as well. So this is just the beginning, and hopefully we'll get a good start and have everyone understanding how this program works and your role in it. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan Taylor to talk about a note about questions. We hope to give lots of opportunities to answer questions today. If you have questions that come up while the presenter is speaking, please put those questions in the chat. We're going to be monitoring the chat and answering those as we can in the chat during the presentations. We will also have opportunities after each presentation to answer questions that are applicable to the whole group. And then, as I mentioned, at the end of the day, we have smaller breakout rooms set up for questions that might be even more specific. So with that, I will turn it over to Ryan Taylor to take us through an overview of the program. Ryan?
Everybody see that okay? All right. Everybody take a deep breath. We're going to go through a lot of information today. But don't be too worried about it. A lot of this will be review from things we've talked about before. As Max suggested, there are some additional trainings coming. One for drought and one for rangeland. Additionally, I just wanted to put everybody's mind at ease. We are trying to line out technical assistance for cropping systems and for rangeland for each and every district that's participating. So we'll go through a lot of stuff. Please do ask questions. Know that we probably won't get everybody to the same speed at the same page today, but we'll work over the coming months to get everybody to that place. So just for some background, earlier this year, House Bill 1181 established the soil health program under the purview of the Colorado Department of Agriculture. That was kind of a big step, but it's really rooted in a grassroots program that was run through a myriad of people. Max and Helen have been on this, Cindy's been on this, some folks at CSU. The NRCS has been a huge supporter of us. We wouldn't be here without them. Through money and through their voice and support. That's really what got us to a place where the legislature could actually vote on us having a soil health program. Additionally, a bill was passed, 235, that gave $2 million towards soil health, which we leveraged with all the grants that we got to raise a little over $5 million for the program, to run the program over the next 3 years. I know I will forget somebody, but there were a lot of people involved in this: the Gates Family Foundation, the NRCS, Colorado Coalition for Healthy Soils, CoCool. There were a numerous amount of producers who were involved from the very beginning, guiding our decision making and our science committee. to make sure that we were putting something together that worked for producers. So the 3 grants that we funded, and when Nikki gets into this, she'll get a little bit more specific. I think there were actually 5, but the conservation districts and the eligible entities that are participating are basically run through the 3 grants. The 319, which was a water quality grant we got from the EPA. The CPP grant we got from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. Those of you on the Eastern Plains will be working with that one. That one's specific to the Republican River watershed and the Ogallala. And then the big dog, the Conservation Innovation Grant, which more than doubled the size. It's about 53% of the program, and took us from 44 producers to 144 producers. That was the big one. And I think the last one we're still waiting on contracting for. So just really quickly, the STAR grant summary. The 319, there are 20 participants working in 5 districts, and we have 3 research fields. We're also looking to identify a research field in Chavano. And our focus there is going to be edge of field water quality research. And WQI was some matching funding we got from the EPA, which was a bonus. The CPP, which also has 20 participants working in 5 districts, plus the research field. So each one's working with 6 total. And that's really about water quantity. We'll focus on water quantity there. We'll have some soil moisture probes we'll be installing. The technical assistance providers will help with that. And we had some help with that from the Gates Family Foundation, CSU, CDA, and CWCD, the Colorado, I forget what that acronym stands for, actually. It's the Water Board. And then the CIG, which most of you are working with, 7 producers per district, and we're working on water availability there too. As we get further into this, I know a lot of you have heard me say this, soil health is the focus, but we're kind of coming at it tangentially, right? We're really focused on soil water, right? The increasing infiltration and water holding capacity is really what's going to build resilience into this system. So if you don't know where you are, here's where you belong. We have 17 conservations we're dealing with, 4 in the 319, 4 in the CPP. We have 7, 6, 8, 9 that we're working with in the CIG, and then our 3 eligible entities. So when we go to our breakout rooms later in the day, if you're wondering which grant you're participating in, this is where you should go for your breakout room. So saving tomorrow's agricultural resources. This was a program designed and developed by conservation districts in Illinois for conservation districts in Illinois. The nice thing about STAR for us is that we get to focus on the resource of concern. And for us, that's soil health, right? Keeping soil in place, soil erosion, you know, we were a Dust Bowl state. So that's a big deal with the ongoing droughts that we're constantly dealing with. Water holding capacity and infiltration rates are really the focus. In Illinois, they have issues with surface water loading of nutrients and groundwater loading. And so theirs was with all the monitoring that they have set up for their groundwater and surface water. If they had 500 producers sign up for this voluntary program and they saw a decrease in nutrient loading, they could point to that directly and say, you know, that there's something going on there. Here in Colorado, we're building the plane as we're flying it, right? We don't have a lot of those monitoring tools in place. We are working with a lot of people to get those in place and be able to evaluate where we are over the coming decades. And so that's the reason why we like this is it's a voluntary program and it's adaptable. So as it grows, It's already in 4 or 5 states. There's 3 on board right now, I think, just directly adjacent to us that are looking at getting involved. As it grows and becomes a bigger player across the nation, you know, it's up to each state to determine what their resource concern is, and to address those directly. In Colorado, you know, we have such a unique, you know, we're not just corn, soybean, and I hate to boil Iowa or Illinois or any of those states down to just that. They have diverse cropping systems too, but here we have, I think we have 10 or 11 field forms and scoring sheets, both for dry land and irrigated. Additionally, the big win was getting a grazing land component put together for this. Many of the states in the West, like us, grass is their #1 crop, and cattle are a big part of that. So getting a star grazing land component put together and worked in that everybody could get behind was a task. And I think we did a really good job. You know, nearly 40% of all arable lands globally are degraded, with aridity being the largest singular pressure on the system. And so I'm really confident that large scale implementation of this program can move the needle on that, as we go through, you know, more drought years than not. So what is STAR? Saving Tomorrow's Agricultural Resources. That's the acronym. It's a free and voluntary tool. That's what we really like about it. We're not looking to be prescriptive in any meaningful way. And it helps producers assess where they are on their soil health journey. It also inspires producers by identifying new practices, and through your guys' help, can structure the conversation around soil health. This is done by completing the STAR field forms and consultation forms, and it's used to work synergistically with the research parts of the program. Jim Ippolito and Megan McMuller here at CSU are putting together a very robust study while we're rolling this out to identify what does soil health mean in Colorado. It's not the same, obviously, in the San Luis Valley as it is in North Park or on the Eastern Plains or on the Western Slope. So how do we in Colorado assess soil health? What are the best tools to do that? They're working on that, and we're looking forward to see what comes from that research so that we can better administer soil health throughout the state. Obviously, this is rooted in the 5 soil health principles, which we will go into a little bit more later in the day. But basically, soil armor, right? Keeping something on the surface to protect the soil, minimizing your soil disturbance, whether that's chemically or physically through tillage, having a good diversity within the crop rotation or within the field itself. The continual living root, I think, is really going to be the big one that plays a bigger role as we get further down the road. And obviously, integration of livestock helps to reduce that carbon and nitrogen ratio of the standing stubble, and gets that nutrient cycle moving in a more natural way. Just as a reminder, you all here today are working with what we call the STAR Plus program. There are funds attached to that, equipment grants, certain obligations. But we know for many of you, there were more applicants than you had room to take in. We just want to remind everybody that STAR on its own for individual producers who either want to participate on their own or there just wasn't enough room for, we would like for the conservation districts and the eligible entities that are participating to get the word out about this. Helen later today will kind of go through, you know, how to get to that website and where those forms are and how to navigate that. So if people are coming in and have any questions, or you're at a conservation district meeting, that you can bring these things up and let the community know that this is happening. These are some tools that they have, and it can be beneficial to the program moving forward. I know I went through quite a bit there. I'm going to hand it over to Nikki Brinson, who's going to help you understand a little bit better the workflow that we'll be going through in the program.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nikki Brinson with the Colorado State Conservation Board, and we're kind of go over the logistics and the program workflow. So as Ryan just kind of went over, we're rolling out the STAR program through the soil health program at the Colorado Department of Agriculture. The key is to roll out one program to our conservation districts and eligible entities on that list that Ryan shared with you. And the most challenging piece is rolling one program out with various grants. So as Ryan mentioned, there were several grants coming in. We actually have a total of 7 that we're managing in the background. And as all of you know, in our experience with working with the complexities of various grants and funding sources and timelines and contracts, all that kind of fun stuff, STAR is really kind of our perfect example of the best utilization of grant funding, taking all those resources of grants and rolling it out into one program. We are setting it up to operate for the conservation districts for everybody, but for those in the conservation districts, very similar to how Abby Gray handles DCT and matching grants, where you will have kind of a centralized contact, but the program will be one program. The biggest funding is for the contracts for the STAR program. Of course, we have, Ryan mentioned that stimulus soil health money is a part of each of them. And then you are kind of divided into those categories of what we were referring to as 319, as the CPP grant, and as the SIG grant. So those are kind of the 3 major grants that just have some minor variances in their contracts. For this first year, we were rolling it out as a 1-year contract. I do know that it's a 3-year commitment. All of you are on board for that. We're just dealing with some contracting things internally at CDA. So we will either extend this first year contract for the other 2 years, or we will have to amend one every single year, but we're hoping to just extend them after this first year. We're just trying to get the money out to you as soon as possible so you can get that initial capacity building dollars and get going on that. This is kind of the snapshot overview. So of course, you will be getting the initial capacity. Once we send you the PO, you just have someone on your board or designated person sign on the first page. There isn't an actual signature line because the dollar amounts are so low. Just sign on that first page and send it back to us, and we can get that paid right away. You also have the producer incentive payments where the producers will be getting matched for their participation. And you'll have the additional capacity dollars that will be coming in that the entity or district will be paid per producer. In addition, we have some more information on those equipment grants and what kind of process you'll need for those, because those will only be available this year as they are directly tied 100% with that stimulus funding. This is a different way to look at the same information. You have that initial $20,000. We will pay that right away with a signed PO. I know that we sent out the 319 contracts because we had those done first, and a couple have already come back. So we will be processing your payments starting tomorrow at CDA. And for those of you that are in SIG or the CPP grant buckets, we will be getting those out to you as soon as possible. For those that signed up in the original application interest form, you do receive an additional $2,000 if you're covering another conservation district. That is paid upon a signed MOU, emailed to that CDA_soil account, and we'll get that payment to you. And then of course, the ongoing capacity payments at the $2,000 per producer for 2022. And those will be paid when you get that first soil sample and you can submit those consultation forms to our email account. We'll get those payments out to you. The producer incentive payments are all at $75 an acre, maximum up to the maximum of $5,000 for each producer. And there's a producer match form that you fill out and submit, and we will get that paid to you. I just wanted to make a note that you will need to kind of watch to make sure that your producers are less than 40% for your board members or their direct family, including in-laws, similar to our other grants. Now, the equipment grants is up to $25,000. And I know there was some confusion on this at first, but the match is required whether the conservation district is buying the equipment or if you're kind of subgranting out to one or a couple of your producers for equipment. So it is a one-to-one match requirement. You have to submit a written plan to us and get us receipts in 90 days. And my next slide, we'll kind of go over this equipment grant a little more. Due to when we have to spend the stimulus funding, we will need that written plan for that equipment grant to our office by October 1st of this year. Keep those receipts for that match required piece. And then to receive the funds with that written plan, you will need a description of the equipment, by whom it will be used, how it will be used, and the anticipated delivery date of that. Once we get that and approve it, we'll get you payment right away. You then have 90 days to make the purchase and then get us those receipts. If a producer receives the grant, so that your district decides to allow a producer to use the grant money, you'll need some additional information on how the grant was solicited. Did you post it in the paper, in the NRCS office, how the producer was selected, and then note if the producer is a board member or a direct family member. Record that in your meeting minutes, which most of you do automatically, and attach those minutes to the written plan when you submit it so that we can get that money to you. Again, you have 90 days to get the purchase done and the final receipts in and email to us at CDA. Oops. And that was the very fast overview of how the details of the funding and money will work. Like I mentioned, it's very similar to our other grants that we roll out, but the entity email is definitely the best for all payments. Again, that's CDA_soil. All of you seem to be using it pretty well already, but that way that'll allows, we will be hiring a grant specialist similar to Abby Gray with the matching grants program, and it will allow that person, myself and Ryan to do the different approvals needed to make sure that we can get you paid as quick as possible and get those processes moving. Are there any questions at this point? Okay.
Given that we're quite a bit ahead of schedule already, I think maybe we should call a little bit of an audible, and Eva's not quite here to take over and talk about the soil health guidebook and lead us through some discussion groups around soil health. So why don't we skip ahead to the program structure and calendar? I think that fits in well here, and we'll buy us a little bit of time while Eva joins us. Does that sound okay to the other team members here?
Sounds great.
Great. Great. So my name is Max Newmeyer. I'm with Helen, half of Ground Up Consulting. We've been working with the Department of Agriculture for a few years now to design this program and to apply for the grants that are funding it. I'm gonna, oh, was there a question?
Can I talk now?
Oh yeah.
Good morning, can you hear?
Go for it. Well, maybe there was some background noise. I wasn't sure if that was a question or not. Why don't we save questions for a few more minutes until I go over the program structure and calendar, and then we can hear from you all if there's questions. So I'm just going to take us through the calendar for the upcoming year, so you can better understand how all these pieces fit together, and then talk a little bit about the org chart. So you understand who all is involved in this project and how they all fit together. Let's start with the calendar, or calendar is here. So we are in January. Can you all see my screen all right? Yes. We're here in January. Right now, you should have brought today a list of the producers that you're going to be working with. I know there's been some questions about when that is due, but hopefully most districts have made, and eligible entities have made some good progress in selecting the producers that they're going to be working with, and hopefully all producers that you're going to be working with are going to be identified by the end of the month. In January, we also have our training today, and in January and February, this is when conservation districts and eligible entities will contract with Colorado Department of Agriculture so that you can receive that initial $20,000 in capacity support. And some districts will receive an extra $2,000 for covering another district. So we hope that contracting will be done as soon as possible. CDA needs to contract with the agencies that are administering the grants before CDA can contract with conservation districts and eligible entities. We're still waiting to finish some of those contracts with NRCS, with National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and so forth, but hopefully those contracts will be forthcoming in the very near future. Certainly, we expect contracting to be finished by February. As Nikki described, when those contracts are signed, CDA can then distribute the initial capacity support, which is that $20,000 right away. So that will happen as soon as tomorrow for some districts, and certainly by the end of February we expect to have all that funding out the door to you all. Consultations, we hope, will occur starting at the beginning of February and finishing up by the end of May. We realize people, farmers and ranchers, make decisions early in the year about what practices they're going to be doing that year. And so we'd like these consultations to occur as soon as possible, but we realize that some of them will happen a little bit later in the spring. Ryan's going to be talking in much more detail about what these consultations are going to look like a little bit later today. So consultations will occur from February through the end of May. And when consultations occur, a form is filled out, a consultation form that collects some basic information and helps guide the conversation with the landowner. Those consultation forms need to be turned in to the Department of Ag by emailing them to CDA_soil at that email address. And that will be the queue to distribute the ongoing capacity support of $2,000 per producer. So you turn in your consultation form that shows that you did a consultation with a producer, and you receive $2,000 for that producer, for each producer you work with. So consultations will occur in the spring of this year, and ongoing capacity support will be distributed when those consultation forms are received. A note on both ongoing capacity support payments and the distribution of incentive payments to producers. Those all have a firm deadline of October 1st. Because this is being funded in part by stimulus funds that need to be spent this year, all consultation forms and producer match forms need to be received by the Department of Ag by October 1st. So I described how the ongoing capacity support will be distributed. The incentive payments, these are the $75 per acre incentive payments that producers receive for participating in the program. They have a minimum of $1,000 and a maximum of $5,000. And they need to document a matching contribution equal to what they're receiving. So if a producer puts in $3,000 towards new practices, and that can be gasoline, that can be time, that can be seed, that can be whatever costs are a part of trying out some new practices on a field. If that equals $3,000, then they would receive $3,000 as a incentive payment. If they were to put in $10,000 of their own money towards new practices on that field, they would receive an incentive payment of $5,000, because $5,000 is the maximum. If they were to put in $500 of their time and money into into this new practices on a field, they would receive an incentive payment of $1,000 because $1,000 is the minimum payment. There is some examples of this in the grant guidelines, and there is a incentive payment calculator attached to the producer match form to easily calculate what your incentive payment will be. These incentive payments will be distributed when the producer match form is received. So similar to the consultation forms, when a producer match form is filled out and emailed to CDA_soil, then that is the trigger for CDA to distribute the incentive payment to the conservation district, which can then distribute it to the producer. So that's the workflow for that. That will happen between June and October. It could happen earlier. We're expecting those producer match forms to come in a little bit later than those consultation forms. There will be a STAR verification process that will happen in the last quarter of the year. We're still working out the details to that, but a sample, a subset of all the STAR fields will be verified to make sure that the practices that are identified on the STAR scoring sheets and field forms are actually occurring. So stay tuned for more details about that. And then the other parts of this calendar are the research pieces of this. Soil sampling, both for STAR and for STAR Plus, are going to occur between May and September. This is so that the ground can thaw and we can have a standardized time to collect soil samples for this program. And we'll be providing much more detail and instruction on soil sampling when we have our in-person trainings later this spring. But soil sampling will happen both for the STAR fields. That's the anybody who'd like to fill out a STAR scoring sheet through the website and receive a free soil health test. We have 100 free soil health tests available. That's just STAR. And then that's also happening for STAR Plus. STAR Plus is all the producers taking part in the program that are receiving incentive payments, who are receiving a consultation from you all, who are receiving some technical assistance that Ryan is going to talk about later today. That's STAR Plus. Other pieces of the research program include installing soil moisture probes. These will be installed on the research-focused fields through the CPP districts. If your CPP district, one of your fields, one of your participants will be a research-focused field, and that field will have soil moisture probes installed on it. And then if you are a SIG district, all the fields in the SIG districts will have soil moisture probes installed as well. And more details and will be forthcoming about the soil moisture probes at a future date. Section 319 research fields will have edge of field water quality equipment installed in them sometime over that period. And then our partners at Colorado State University will be analyzing water and soil samples between March and the end of the year. So this is the calendar of what's coming up this year. Maybe I'll pause there and see if there's any questions, and then we'll go over the org chart. Any questions?
Yeah, Max, there were some questions in the chat about the equipment grant. So if you could go over that, I think everybody would be happy.
Great. Equipment grants.
I can read it for you, Max. It's on the equipment grant. Does the district get the $25,000, or is that for each producer that applies?
A total of $25,000, and it could be used entirely by the district. It could be distributed entirely to the STAR Plus participants, or it could be distributed in part to STAR Plus participants, or used in part by the district. So that's up to the district to decide how that money is going to be spent.
Great. Another question is, what is the difference between STAR and STAR Plus?
Great. I think I addressed that a little bit, but this is fundamental and I think would be helpful to just say it again. So STAR is available to all producers in the state. They can go on the CDA Soil Health website. Helen will show us how to do that a little bit later today. They can fill out a field form and get it scored by the department and receive a 1 through 5 star rating based on their practices or their processes, depending if they're cropland or rangeland. And that they get a star field sign, and they get a sense of how they're doing with soil health. That's STAR. STAR Plus is what we're here today to talk about. It comes with incentive payments of $75 per acre. It involves a consultation with you all and some technical assistance over the next 3 years, is quite a bit more robust and is the way we're able to provide capacity support to the conservation districts. So hopefully that helps clarify the difference between STAR and STAR Plus.
And one other kind of combination question, is CDA covering the cost of the soil test and the shipping of the samples?
Yes. Okay, I'm going to move on from the calendar to the org chart. Eva, thank you for joining us. We're going to have you join we're going to go through this section first and then have you start up maybe at around 10:15. I hope that works for you. So this is the org chart for the federal SIG project, but also really for the whole STAR Plus program. It begins and ends here with Cindy Lair, who is overseeing the whole program. And reporting to Cindy is Ryan Taylor, Helen and myself. We're Ground Up Consulting, Nikki Brinson, and a to-be-hired grant administrator, as well as Jim Ippolito and Megan McMuller from CSU. Ryan Taylor is the program coordinator. His responsibilities include project management, project evaluation, and a whole lot of other things, coordinating with you all, overseeing the technical assistance providers and the soil health specialists, training and project evaluation. Ryan is going to be working with what we're calling technical assistance providers, as well as some soil health specialists that CDA hopes to hire this coming year. And these technical assistance providers will be assigned to districts to assist with technical assistance with the STAR Plus participants. They'll also help with the soil sampling and the installation of soil moisture probes. So these technical assistants will provide some more information about these technical assistance providers a little bit later today and how that part of the program is going to work. There will be a grazing lands technical assistance provider and a cropland technical assistance provider for each district. These TAPs and soil health specialists are going to work with conservation district and eligible entities staff to run the program, which involves doing these consultations, collecting environmental and financial outcome data. Financial outcome data is only relevant to the federal SIG districts, and we're going to cover that in more detail in a breakout room at the end of the day. Tasks include collecting those soil samples, collecting management information, installing soil moisture probes if relevant, performing those initial and final consultations, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and hosting a field day and distributing incentive payments. So you're going to be interfacing with these technical assistance providers, these soil health specialists, and with Ryan Taylor to achieve those tasks. Helen and myself are project managers for this project. We're coordinating team meetings and we're assisting with project evaluation. Nikki Brinson is in charge of grant administration. She's going to be the point person for contracting with conservation districts for distributing capacity support payments and incentive payments. And Dr. Jim Ippolito and Megan McMuller are running the research part of this program. Their tasks include, along with some others, installing soil moisture probes, synthesizing environmental outcome data, and some deliverables as well. Helen and I are overseeing these other partners on this grant. I'm going to take these in a different order. The CSU Center for Science Communication is going to be developing some 3 documentary films about the STAR program, 2 of which are going to be focused on producers and who might be interested in participating in STAR or STAR Plus in the future, as well as some other media to communicate this program to the public and to other future participants. Acres USA is going to be doing event production. We're going to have 4 large events over the three years, and are going to be developing a community forum on a website where participants can interact with one another. They're also going to be developing 12 soil health primers that will be educational materials for participants. The CSU Extension Agricultural Business Management team is going to be assisting with economic analysis. They're going to develop a partial budget analysis form and train conservation districts on the federal SIG project to collect financial outcome data, which is a requirement of this grant. So that's only relevant to SIG districts. And then finally, Dr. James Hale is a sociologist. He is going to run some focus groups and some surveys with some participants to meet the requirements of the grant around sociological outcomes. That's a brief overview of the partners on this grant. I'm going to let them now introduce themselves. We're going to show a video that's about half an hour long of each of these partners introducing themselves. And then we'll turn it over to Eva for the next interactive part of this program. So bear with me for a moment while I queue up this video so that you can get to know each of the different partners on this grant. And I just want to thank everyone again for being here today. It's really exciting to see so many great scientists and communication experts and all sorts of other folks working together on this project. I'm going to turn it over to Cindy to introduce herself and the Colorado Department of Agriculture team. Cindy?
Thank you, Max. Welcome to our introductory Conservation Innovation Grant Partners meeting. I'm Cindy Lair, and I'm the manager of the Colorado State Conservation Board and the Soil Health Initiative. We really appreciate your participation and the expertise you have and that you're going to be putting towards helping farmers and ranchers build their soil function and resilience. I'm going to introduce our CDEA contributors, and I'm going to start with Ryan Taylor. Ryan is the Soil Health Program Coordinator, and he's very active in all aspects of implementing the Soil Health Program, and particularly he's quite the expert on STAR. I'd also like to introduce Nikki Brinson, and she is our District Operations Manager. Nikki is managing the contracting side of the soil health programs and will eventually oversee our soil health grant specialist who cannot get here soon enough. For now, she's managing our grant contracts as they come in from the granting agencies, and she's also overseeing the mechanics of contracting with the participating conservation districts and our CIG partners, as well as our eligible entities that are delivering the program. So I'm going to conclude with that, but I'm going to turn it back over to you, Max.
Great. And there's one more player in all this that needs to be introduced. That's Helen Silver. Helen is my business partner and is going to be helping coordinate this project with all of you. So I'm sure most of you know Helen already, but really glad to be working with her. So with that, we're going to start these partner introductions. As a reminder, we're asking that each group spend no more than 6 or 7 minutes. Less is fine. To introduce yourself personally, give a high-level description of how you're going to be contributing to this project, and highlight any key dates that others should know about that are coming up this coming year. And we realize that some details are in flux, and you might not be ready to explain exactly what's going to happen this coming year. But if there's anything that others should know about coming up in the next few months, please spend a moment to let us know about that. Thank you to the CSU Department of Crop Sciences for kicking this off. They were the first partner in all of this, and so I think it's fitting that Jim and Megan start us off. Go ahead, Jim and Megan.
Go ahead, Megan.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I think I know most of you, but I'm Megan Mockmuller, and I'm a research scientist in the Soil and Crop Sciences Department. And Jim and I will be, I'll let Jim introduce himself, but we'll be leading the soil sampling, soil health analyses, and partner with the soil moisture sensor team and deploy soil moisture sensors across hundreds of fields. Jim, go ahead and introduce yourself, and then maybe get everyone else in our department.
Awesome, thanks, Megan. So I'm Jim Ippolito. I'm a professor of soil fertility, soil health in the Department of Soil and Crop Sciences at Colorado State University. I've been working in soil health for 30 years. Before it was called soil health, it was called environmental soil quality, and that's where I started. I cut my teeth, started in 1991, focused on soil physical, chemical, and biological attributes and how those change over time within agroecosystems. And I'm really happy to be a part of this project and other projects that I get to play with Max and Megan and Helen and others. And I'll leave it at that. Why don't I pass it off to, there's two other people from the department. I see Jay Ham and Ian Axland. One of you two?
Sure. This is Jay Ham, also a professor in soil and crop sciences at CSU. My area of study is micrometeorology, but our team is leading the soil moisture measurement aspects of the project. So you come up to our labs, they look a little bit more like electrical engineering labs instead of soils labs. And that's because we're developing sensors for soils and connecting those to the internet using Internet of Things. So this will be Internet of Things soil health. So it'll be really exciting. And one of my key partners on that is my graduate student and going to be research associate, Ian Axland. Ian, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, my name is Ian Axland. Hello, everyone. A little bit about me. I spent a couple years of my early college career at CU Boulder Engineering, kind of bouncing around from department to department there, eventually kind of finding my way here to Soil and Crop Sciences at CSU. And then graduating with my undergrad degree there with applied information technology. And then I'm pursuing, or went right into my master's degree, and I'm pursuing that and hoping to finish that here very shortly, like Jay mentioned. And so, yeah, we're excited. We work a lot with sensors, obviously, but also connecting them to the internet and IoT and things of that nature. And so kind of our role from like a high level, I guess, is to kind of help facilitate training of the sensors, and then also obviously creating and delivering the systems as well as the soil moisture and temperature sensors themselves.
Great. I should also mention that Jim, Megan, and Ian and Jay are also involved in two other grant-funded projects, Section 319 project and a Conservation Partners Program / CWCB Water Plan grant-funded project. Jim and Megan, would you mind saying just a few words about the research focus fields and what's going to be going on those?
I can throw a few words together. Ryan Taylor and I just got off a call with a producer down in Prowers County. What we're doing is, this is going to be real rough, Max. So what we're doing is we're pairing research focus fields across the state to essentially quantify soil health in systems that are, I'll call them business as usual in terms of management practice versus management practices that we think would promote soil health. So the 5 principles promoted by the NRCS are sort of what we're looking for in these research-focused fields. These fields will be outfitted with soil moisture sensors that Jay and Ian and their team will be developing. And I saw in the chat that we want to mention Argos satellite system that Jay has been instrumental in connecting these in-field soil moisture sensors to. I'll speak for Jay. So this is really cool technology that these sensors will be deployed in locations that you really don't need a cell phone signal because they connect directly to this satellite system. This satellite system, from what Jay's told me, is a satellite system that's used to track animals like whales in the ocean and their movement. And we now have access to that system thanks to Dr. Ham. It's going to be incredible. You'll be able to have real-time soil moisture data on any producer's field where these sensors are located. So the premise behind our work is to promote soil health promoting practices that are essentially promoted through the NRCS, but will be also promoted through the CDA and CSU. And with the help or with the hopes that these promotion practices enhance soil water, which enhances soil microbiology and nutrient cycling and turnover, and I could go on, but enhances soil health.
Mm-hmm.
Megan, do you want to add anything?
Just maybe the fact that these research focused fields will include a more intense sampling regime, and so we'll take multiple samples to really be able to try to detect the differences between these management practices. But then, in this grant, we're adding, close to 100 other fields that will be outfitted with soil moisture sensors, and we'll take soil samples, but just not as many as we are in the research focused fields. So this particular grant really expands our geographic range and probably practices too that we can encompass. And ultimately with, in this grant and the other grants that we're working on, it will allow us to build a soil health inventory for the state, ultimately to hopefully be able to better determine what is soil health, what are the most sensitive metrics, and then take that information back to the field scale and ultimately be of help to guide management on the ground to really enhance soil health. And that may look different depending on where you are in the state or what sort of cropping system or whether you're pasture or range. And so that just kind of to give you a broad level overview of what we're trying to achieve.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We're going to move on now to the CSU Center for Science Communication. Jamie Jacobson, do you want to kick us off?
Yes. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Max, for introducing yourselves. I thought I might share a couple slides that I put together just about our center. So I'm going to go and navigate to a PowerPoint really quick with some imagery. I hope everyone can see that. And let me just screen share. Hold on one sec. There we go. Okay, so we are the Center for Science Communication at Colorado State, and just a little bit about our center. We're a department-based center, and we are housed in journalism and media communication. So essentially, we are made up of a group of faculty, students, and staff that really specialize in communicating science. Going to go back here. I wanted to just introduce a couple members of our team that are on the call today and give them a chance to introduce themselves that are going to be playing a key role in this project. So as Max mentioned, I'm Jamie Jacobson. My training is in documentary film work, specifically science documentary storytelling, and I direct our center here at CSU. We also have Field Peterson. Field, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Field. I'm a second-year master's student in the journalism department. I've been working with the CSC for about a year now. Started doing some strategic communications for the center itself, and then worked on some marketing, but overall just external communications for the center. And I'm going to be doing more strategic comms work here and then helping with the kind of the external side of the documentary work and transmedia development too. So thanks.
And we also have Ria Mays that's joining us as a key member of our team. Ria, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Ria Mays. I work here at CSU in some different capacities in communications as a writer for the Biomedical Sciences Department. I also do freelance science writing and am a part-time graduate student in the journalism department, working with Jamie and Field and others for the center, executing different writing projects. So I will be helping with this project to write the scripts for the videos and other materials that go on the website, and I'm excited to be here.
So I'll reference a little bit about specifically what we'll be doing for the SIG, which Field and Ria mentioned in their introductions. I do have a brief slide here that just tells a little bit more about the center, and then I'll explain how that maps onto this project. But really, we focus on interdisciplinary stakeholder engaged scholarship as a center. And our mission as a whole is to foster communication outcomes that are in pursuit of socially sustainable agricultural, environmental, and health systems. So I think that really networks very well with this project. And our work includes everything from research to teaching, science communication, media production, which is a key part of our role in this project, mentoring, training, and community outreach work, which is also going to play a big factor here. So specifically for the Conservation Innovation Grant, the CSC has joined this project really with the goal of developing a strategic communications plan around this effort surrounding the STAR program and soil health and engaging stakeholders throughout the state of Colorado and hopefully even beyond in this larger issue that is affecting us all. So one of the very first tasks just in terms of 2022 will really be identifying key goals for the strategic communications plan. How are we going to reach community members, producers, ranchers, general public, and policymakers, and outlining that process. So that's really just at the forefront of our to-do list when we launch this project. We're also going to be building an innovative website, which will be a landing page basically for everyone to come and to engage with this project in a transmedia way. And by that, I mean all sorts of media, whether it's video, photo, text, audio. Part of that website will really be devoted to producing 3 short documentary films. So that's really the heart of our work, and that they will be able to be found online for people to engage with. And they'll be directed at different audiences that we want to really engage with soil health in the STAR program. So currently we've identified producers as our top priority, those who are engaged in large scale production, agricultural producers, and also ranchers. So those are the key demographics that we see sculpting documentary stories to connect with, as well as the general public and policymakers. And one reason I think that we landed on documentary storytelling as a vehicle for communication and engagement is the idea of looking for community influencers in the different conservation districts that we're working with, who are already engaged in new management practices, who might serve as models to inspire others to engage in this project. So we're looking for another thing that's really at the top of our list is just to be finding those compelling stories and really interesting people across the state that we'd like to go out and interview and film and profile and then share their work on a more broader scale. So I think that's really it in a nutshell. We will also be doing some social media outreach as a way to connect with audiences and really connect them to the actual media that we're developing. So it is a long-term effort. I think the project is slated to run over a couple years. So filmmaking is very labor intensive and time consuming. So it will take us some time to develop the documentary short films themselves. But while we're in production, we plan to be engaging audiences through our social media channels and platforms. So that they'll be engaged in the project while it's underway. Jim, is that hand for me? Yeah.
Yeah, Jamie, I have a question for you. So this is more internal to CSU, but you know,
I'm just fast forwarding through a quick discussion that occurred, and then we'll hit play with the next partner. Hopefully you're enjoying this, getting to know some of the partners we're working with. Great, and thank you, Jamie. I just want to remind people in the chat is all of your contact info, and would encourage all of you to reach out to each other if there's ideas that come up in how you might collaborate. For time's sake, we're going to move on to the CSU Extension Agricultural Business Management team. Go ahead, Brent, Jeffrey, and Jenny.
Thanks, Max. I'll go ahead and start. My name is Brent Young. I'm a regional extension specialist. My office is in Sterling, Colorado, and I'm a member of the Ag Business and Management team. I'll let my colleague Jeff and Jenny introduce themselves in just a minute. Briefly, our contribution to the project will be to provide training for the soil conservation districts and other partners to assist farmer rancher participants in developing partial budgets as a way to do a financial analysis of the soil health practices that they plan to implement as part of the grant project. We'll also help the districts and partners monitor the producers throughout the study, helping them collect financial data so that we'll be able to develop some rather extensive case studies toward the end of the project. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff and have Jeff introduce himself.
Thanks, Brent. I'm glad you're feeling a little bit better and we're able to get on. Anyway, I am Jeff Turnell, agricultural and business management economist with CSU. I have an extension appointment and I am have a joint appointment with the Department of Ag and Resource Economics on campus, as do Brent and Jenny. I've been around for a long time. I'm probably the old guy on the team, but with that brings a lot of wisdom and experience. So Jenny, I will let you share something about yourself.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm Jenny Byerman, also an ABM economist with CSU Extension. I'm located in Grand Junction, so Brent and Jeff and I are all located throughout the state. So we'll be responsible for working a little more closely with some of those conservation districts within our regions.
Okay, well, thank you, Brent, Jenny, and Jeff. Acres USA, would you like to introduce yourselves and explain your part of the project?
Would love to, and thank you for the opportunity. It's quite a group we have here, so it's an honor to be here and hope everybody having a good Friday. My name is Ryan Slaybaugh. I'm the general manager of We're Acres USA. We'll be supporting the education component of the soil health program. We're based in Greeley. We were founded in 1971 as a soil health media company and publishing company. We expanded that in the recent years and do all sorts of different things, including events and those types of things. And Lydia Lazar will be going into kind of how we'll be supporting the program. Overall, we moved to Colorado in 2016. And one of the reasons we moved here was we really loved the intersection of agriculture and conservation that was going on even at the time. And boy, it's been a great fit. And just looking at this group and what we're doing today and what we're talking about, Colorado gets stuff done and we're proud to be a part of it. So Lydia, do you want to talk about how we're going to support the program.
My pleasure. Hi, everyone. I'm Lydia Lazar, and I'm working with Ryan and the team at ACRES to deliver the educational materials that the program will be providing to the participants. And that consists of soil health primers or primers. We kind of go back and forth on how we say that. I'm going to say primers. And we're going to be designing those and providing those pretty quickly so that you'll have those as resources to share with the participants later this year. We'll also be responsible for delivering events on farm field days. The project, as you know, calls for 4 of those, and the first one is scheduled for October. And ACRES has the capacity to deliver those events, including providing the registration capacity and staffing day of event production and other services on the farms themselves. Finally, as part of our service in this grant, we'll be developing a website, a landing page, and that will be the home for these primers, as well as for forums, if you will, that will be discussion boards associated with this educational material that all the participants in the program will have access to. And we will also be using that web page as the event management system. So farmers and producers who will want to sign up for the events will do so at that web page. So those are pretty much the 3 big buckets that ACRES is responsible for, and I will be the point person for ACRES. A little bit about me: I've had quite a varied career, but early in my career, I did do a graduate degree in hydrology. So I do have a pretty good idea of what we're talking about, although it's kind of old knowledge, and I've learned a lot of other things in the interim. So I'm happy to be beefing back up on an early passion. Back to you, Max. Happy to take questions later.
Great, thank you so much. CSU Department of Sociology, you're up.
Hello, everyone. My name is James Hale. I got some slides here I'll pull up. So yeah, my name is James Hale. I'm a postdoc in sociology. I actually graduated from the sociology department at CSU and have been working in Colorado for around 15 years on different food system stuff, whether it be urban ag or working with farmers. I'm mostly studying the social and cultural dimensions of this work. And Adam Snickers on the call. I thought he could introduce himself right now if you're there, Adam.
Yeah, thanks. I'm a first-year PhD student, just finished the first semester, and I'll be just supporting the project with James and working with him and Dr. Caroline as well.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, so Michael is a professor in sociology and associate dean of research and faculty development, and he couldn't be here today. But wishes he could be, and you all will hopefully be able to meet him in the future. So our primary role is really to develop information about the social dimensions of participating producers, and especially those around like why they adopt and the challenges and benefits to adopting. And so we'll be looking at the impact on producer communities observed through on-farm field days and other activities that we'll be doing. And we'll also be providing some support to the documentary team, which Jamie and I have already met to chat about some of that stuff, and we look forward to doing that. Our approach is going to be looking at things like community readiness and social relationships, motivations for adoption, barriers and opportunities to improving soil health and program sustainability and trade-offs. And we will examine this stuff through things like focus groups and interviews and participant observation and some secondary data collection. And most of the data collection will happen in the first and the third year, just to see how experiences change over time. And we're actually hoping to get started with this work. Adam and I have already been chatting about it as soon as possible to do the first round so we can sort of see what it's like at the beginning of the program for some of the participants. And I should also say that we're going to actually engage some people that aren't participants to see about their perceptions of the program and what some of the perceived challenges and barriers to them getting involved would be, so that we can get a broader understanding within these communities around how they might engage with the STAR program. And a lot of the times in the past, we're still working out the way we might approach this, but one way that we typically have done this in the past is looking at various different types of assets or capitals and talking to producers and asking them about them, sort of framing questions around these different resources, and then also doing some of that in our analysis to understand these things like community readiness or barriers and opportunities that folks might be experiencing to participate in something like the STAR program, or just improving soil quality in general. This framework it's often used by rural sociologists and economists to study things like community development, and it also can be helpful to working
cross-disciplinarily, like with others on the team that I know are looking at things like the financial components and whatnot. And lastly, I'll just say we're chatting through how to do our sort of sampling right now, and we're thinking of doing 3 conservation districts or case studies. So concentrating our interviews at least on 3 cases that we can compare that sort of represent various sort of like asset levels of those different things I just showed. And so right now we're thinking about
so at this point, veered off into another discussion, and so we're gonna stop here. Hopefully, this was a good use of time in getting to know some of the other partners that are working on this project. As you can see, there's a lot of different partners contributing across all different types of domains and departments. So I'd love to pause here again and see if there's any questions about the different partners on this grant.
Max, this is Patrick O'Neill. For the soil moisture sensors, are these going to be shipped out to the different participants and then we've got to sort out what to do with them, or is someone actually coming to our sites and installing sensors, or what's the current on that?
Great question. That is something we're still figuring out, to be quite honest with you. What we do know is that we're going to be doing it in rounds. We're going to start off with some first round. That's just going to be a few soil moisture probes, see how those go. Then we're going to try the CPP districts, and then we're going to do the SIG districts after that. So this is those details still need to be worked out. The technical assistance providers, which are going to be a critical piece of this, as well as the soil health specialists, are really going to help with the installation of those. To the extent that conservation districts and eligible entities are installing soil moisture probes, they will be trained on how to do so at a later date. So I'm sorry, Patrick, I can't give you a really firm answer on how that's going to happen, but it's something we're working on right now, and getting those installed across STAR Plus fields is something that's going to take several months, and something we're hoping to finish by the end of the year, not in the next month or so. So I punted a little bit, but hopefully that's helpful. Vanessa?
If we have a research field identified, or if our district is identified as having research fields, would we know that? I'm just a little confused on to where we fall into the research field.
Yes, you would know that. You would know that by now. We're also going to go over the research focused fields in those breakout rooms at the end of the day. But why don't you and I connect about this offline, and I can help you understand it a little bit better.
Okay.
But Max, just following up, that the answer to Vanessa's question is any conservation district that has a research focused field has already been notified of that, or will be notified very soon. Could you clarify that?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Vanessa, if I didn't answer your question. We'll just go through them. Routt County, West Otero, and have research focused fields. There's some existing research focused fields in the Longmont area. Ryan, jump in if I'm getting any of these details wrong. And then the 4 CPP districts, which are Burlington, Sedgwick, Haxton, and Northeast Prowers, all have research-focused fields. We're trying to add a research-focused field to Charbonneau. We haven't been able to do that quite yet. And there's no research-focused fields on any of the federal SIG districts. Those districts have soil moisture probes, but not researched. They aren't research-focused fields. Does that help?
Yes, I guess there was just early discussion about Section 319 recipients having research fields, so I guess that's not the case. And I'm sorry, I'm just confused on that part, but we can discuss it later.
Yes. Some Section 319 ones have research-focused fields. Not all of them do at this point.
And we are trying to help we have been going behind the scenes and trying to find research focused fields for the CPP districts who are having trouble finding research focused fields.
Okay. With that, everybody. Ryan, whenever you're ready, go ahead and get started.
Okay. I've received a few emails over lunch that the districts are, it's a lot of good background information, but we need to know what we're supposed to be doing. And that leads us to, the few hours we have here this afternoon. We'll go over the consultation forms, the field forms, the scoring sheets, technical assistance, things of that nature. We'll touch grazing lands. But hopefully by the end of the day, most of the questions that you all have will be answered. I'm sorry, can everybody hear me okay? Okay. Hopefully by the end of the day, all of your questions will be answered. And if they're not, we've got the breakout rooms. Always feel free to put questions in the chat. And then any questions that are left unanswered, we will, we can always do a back and forth, either with a phone call or an email or something like that. I'm sure there'll be some things that we have to itemize and email back as we end the day.
Ryan, do you also maybe want to mention the office hours now that we're going to be having?
Yeah, so I am a little bit unsure on the cadence of those. I think, weren't we going to do that every week, Max, for a little while?
Yes, starting next Monday.
You want to talk about that for a second, because I'm not super clear on all the details.
Sure thing. Starting next week, every Monday at 11 a.m. Starting on the 31st, we're going to have an hour of office hours, so that districts and eligible entities can bring questions to the soil health team, and we can get those questions answered as they come up. As Ryan likes to say, we're building this plane as we fly it, and hopefully today gives you a good sense of where we're headed, but we know there's going to be more questions that come up and things we need to answer. So hopefully every Monday at 11 a.m. will be an opportunity for you to join us on Zoom and get those questions answered as we go.
Okay. So we'll am I sharing the right screen? Just I wanted to make sure. Okay. So we're going to start with an overview of the consultations. We have a diverse agricultural ecosystem in Colorado with unique challenges. The new soil health program is really working to ensure that it endures and that our most valuable resource, our producers, can thrive in these changing environments. So the consultation forms, what are they? Why are we doing this? The consultation form, first and foremost, and just to reiterate this, you will have some assistance with this. So if you're not familiar with how to go out and do a consultation at at a producer's location. We'll have a technical service provider or technical assistance provider for cropping and rangeland systems. We're hoping to ensure that they can get out and do 2 of those with each. And so if you're strictly grazing lands, your first 2 will be covered. If you have a mix and match, then you should end up with a couple from each to kind of help you learn how to go in and do a consultation. But really the consultation form is the first step that familiarizes you with the producer's operation. Getting to know the operation, its goals, and what practices will help them get there is really the first step in the process. And understanding this larger picture will ensure that the producer's needs are always at the forefront of what we're doing. So we need to identify fields, soil health practices to implement, things of that nature. The producer might want to enroll their best field. They might want to enroll their worst field. You know, both of these have challenges. For example, if they chose their best field, it's going to be hard to improve right away, but it might have a better baseline for them to work with. Whereas the worst field might have a better initial response, but limited overall because of things that persist in the system. For example, salts that accumulate on the surface, especially if you don't have a ton of really good irrigation water, you might be limited there. So getting to know the operation and the goals, identifying the field and the soil health practices you want to implement all kind of go together. And really, this is the first step for the conservation districts to facilitate that conversation about soil health. You are all going to have folks that are, you know, on the spectrum of the soil health journey, so to speak. Each will have their own needs and requirements. Not everybody's going to be the same, but this is really the beginning point for the conservation districts to facilitate that conversation about soil health. We'll cover a lot more of this at the in-person trainings. Some things that come to mind, you know, are things like, you know, depending on the texture of your soil, you might lose a quarter to a half inch of water in your soil every time you run a plow through there. You know, starting discussions about healthier food web cycles, better nutrient cycling, how this all fits in with cost of pesticides and fertilizers, things of that nature are going to be important to this conversation as well. And understanding the producer's goals for the operation, again, helps you to understand how all these components fit in. I think we've had some really good discussion this morning and today about, you know, I saw a comment, we've decided that all tillage is bad. And there are definitely, you know, nuances to that conversation, right? Like I said, if you have a compaction layer, that's really going to limit your yield, root growth. You might have some stagnant water issues. So I just think it's important that we understand, you know, the goals will change from operation to operation, and that really what we're doing here is we're trying to offer the biggest toolbox possible so that every producer can use this successfully and get to where they want to be. We don't have a definition of what quote unquote soil health is. These are domesticated systems, and each one has its own, the producer has its own desires, right? And whether those are, you know, economic or ecological, land ethic, these are all things that influence people's decisions. The consultation form also allows us to look, you know, it allows the producer to share with you, you know, past successes in soil health if they have some. You know, maybe they've tried, you know, no-till or minimum till or companion planting or cover cropping, and they've had some success or limited success. In some cases, they might have had, you know, failures. Those are every bit as important, right? Because we learn from all of those experiences, and you will become the hub of that localized soil health system. So You know, producers like to talk. I know that you all like to share what you guys have with the producers in your area. This will be a good way to get a lot of past successes and past failures under one tent, and really have a robust conversation about what works specifically in your area, what might be some barriers that people have overcome, how did they overcome that. That's all going to be part of the conversation that you guys have moving forward with your producers. Planning and implementation in conjunction with the STAR forms. So as we'll go into later, the STAR forms and the scoring sheets are going to really drive much of the conversation after you know and understand the producer's goals and their operation. And the STAR forms and scoring sheets will allow you to understand, you know, what gets scored what way. You know, a producer might have some low-hanging fruit, for example, if they're already cover cropping. If they went to a 2 or more species winter hardy cover crop, there's a significant amount of points associated with that. And so there might be an additional cost to that. Maybe, you know, maybe you're throwing out more seed, but it might be worth it in the long run. And so to do that, the scoring sheet allows them to look and see, how do I operate these practices within my operation to maximize my benefit? And the STAR forms, how we ask those questions, how they're grouped together, kind of fit into the consultation and drive some of this conversation. Everything is privacy, privacy, privacy. We know, we've checked with our legal team. All of the personal information in this program is not subject to Freedom of Information Acts or CORA searches or anything like that. So it's really important that your producers know their information will not be shared. Specific information will not be shared. There might be some aggregated data, but they're not. Their privacy is going to be the utmost number one thing for us throughout this entire process. And then lastly, I think it's important to understand for you guys that there is a difference between consultation and technical assistance. The consultation begins the conversation. It gives us the information we need to make decisions, help them make decisions. But the technical assistance, you know, the how-to, well, I want to do cover cropping, but how do I do that? That's really going to be, you know, what you guys lean on your technical assistance providers for, and they can come up with those specific plans to help you navigate that, because we can't all know everything, right? For example, understanding what a representative sample out of a field looks like, how to take those soil samples. We'll do some training with that, but you know, once you're out there on your own, we really want to make sure that those technical assistance providers are there to help you get through those things, the soil sampling, the soil moisture probe installations. And just to be clear, most of that technical assistance will happen after the initial consultation. So that said, let's go ahead and take a look at the different sections within a consultation form. This comes from the cropping side of things. And what we're really looking for here are, you know, what are your goals for soil health and your current activities? Each operation has, you know, more than one goal, right? They all have an economic goal, because if they're not in business, they can't do any of this stuff. But they might have ecological goals or social goals, some sort of, you know, land ethic that they hold dear to themselves and their family. These are all important, right? And I'm guessing that most of you will find that, you know, all of these things are true, almost across the board. So what's the producer doing now for soil health, right? It's important to know where each person is And by knowing that, we can kind of make a plan of where they want to go and how to get there. What's been working for them, what hasn't worked yet, or what hasn't worked at all, are all really important. Again, you know, I hear a lot of things, a lot of times people will say, you know, cover cropping doesn't work here, or continuous planting doesn't work here. There are folks all over the state doing these things. Each situation is going to be unique, but getting folks like that under the umbrella and having those conversations, allowing those peer-to-peer interactions to take place, utilizing those anecdotes at your conservation district meetings or what have you, can really push the needle. Which practices have they considered or be open to trying? This really has a social component to it. When I was on the Western Slope this past spring, I guess it was last spring in May, I keep forgetting we turn the calendar year. When I was over on the Western Slope and at the end of May, beginning of June, you know, I had producers tell me they're, you know, look, I'm not going to do that. I don't want my field to look trashy like John down on the corner. So there is this social component, and hopefully, you know, through these conversations, we can start to normalize what's considered acceptable. And then I think we've talked about this today as well. What are the barriers that's kept these people from trying these practices out? And what would it take to adapt them? Part of the program that you guys are participating in, right? The STAR Plus, you know, the incentives we're talking about aren't huge amounts of money, but you know, over a 3-year period of time, it's a good chunk of change. And you know, this allows them to maybe adopt some principles on a field or a pasture that they maybe just didn't want to take that financial risk, because that's ultimately what the producers are doing, right? They take an awful lot of financial risk for the benefit of all of us. And so can the STAR program, you know, step in and kind of alleviate some of that burden, so that they can do some of the things that maybe they just couldn't afford, or maybe they didn't want to try, or this can lower that barrier hopefully in many ways. So why is field information good? You guys are trained at this point to answer in the chat, and I considered that, but it's important for us to know, you know, the impact that we're making with the dollars that are going out the door. So, you know, how many acres? I know you guys were all given packets. How do we choose our producers? You know, impact was something that everybody might have taken into account, right? You know, and not to disparage anybody, but no-till on an acre is much different than no-till on a couple hundred acres, for example, right? And so, you know, we want everybody under the umbrella. We don't want to alienate anybody, but just to assess how much of an impact the program is having, understanding how much acreage is involved is a good thing for us. The current rotation, we talked about this a little bit in my breakout room. You know, if there's a lot of reasons why a farmer might go corn on corn on corn on corn, and no, Nick, I'm not trying to pick on corn. I'm just saying, it might come out, you know, the banker or somebody says, you know, we want a fully insured crop. And so I've had a lot of seed dealers tell me at the trade shows, they work up cover crop schemes every single winter for producers for the next spring, and every single spring, most of those people don't come back. And when they ask the question, you know, why didn't we do any cover crops or companion planting, the number one answer they hear is they wanted a fully insured crop. And so corn on corn on corn, you know, when we think about our 5 soil health principles, you know, because we have that monocrop over and over and over, we increase that pest pressure. And so there's sort of a feedback loop. And again, I'm not bagging on corn. I'm saying the rotation becomes important if we're going to break pest cycles and things of that nature. And it's good to know what that is. what's the cropping history over the last 5 years? Have they been able to stick to that rotation, right? And what are the influences, right? If you know, drought gets brought up a lot, maybe they've made changes to their cropping history over the last 5 years because of water availability. And irrigated or dry land, you know, that tells us a lot and gives us a lot of flexibility depending on where we're going. Crop insurance, obviously, it's important to know if crop insurance is going to have any complications with what we're doing. You know, we're not trying to increase the risk for the producer. We're trying to make this seamless and not onerous on the producer or you, the conservation districts, and eligible entities that are discharging this program. Likewise, knowing what your yield's been, high, low, or average field for the operation is important because we can track that over time and see how the soil health practices that we've implemented has impacted this. You know, there's a producer that we're working with out near Haxton who's continuous crop since the late 90s and has been no-till since the late 80s. And they have a ton of organic matter in their soil. They have a lot of aggregate stability and a lot of structure. They got almost 10 inches of rain and then didn't get any. I think they had 21 inches of rain in Northeast Colorado by the end of May, beginning of June sometime, and then they didn't get anything after that. And I know that those fields were able to hold on to that water a lot better. So, you know, that's our goal. But within that system, there was variability, right? And that variability is what we're trying to kind of isolate within the operation. So, you know, everybody has a high, low, and average field for the operation, and helping them figure out which one of those they want to use would be important. Again, along with that, right, describing any problems that they've had historically: erosion, pests, nutrients, moisture management, planting, harvesting issues, irrigation, stuff like that. And it might just be as simple as, you know, a lot of topsoil has been lost and they have a lot of rocks at the surface or something like that. But all of these help us get to know the operation. And then what are the goals for the field long term? Maybe not necessarily for the operation, just for this particular field, and how that plays into the larger operation would be good. You know, I mean, if they start seeing, are they willing to implement across a larger section of their operation if they're successful, what that looks like. They'll let us know, and that's good for us to have on file. So the most important thing is going to be choosing a new practice, right? And so here we're really looking at, you know, we're basing these on the 5 soil health factors or soil health principles. Soil armor, minimizing soil disturbance, plant diversity, continual living root, livestock integration. You guys all did a great job putting those in the chat. I think you guys had them in like 5 seconds. But it's important because soil armor controls, you know, water and wind erosion, reduces evaporation, suppresses weed growth. On a bare soil in a 100-degree day, your soil temperatures can reach north of 140 degrees. The soil armor is important. Minimizing disturbance, whether it's a biological disturbance, it can limit photosynthesis. Chemical disturbances can disrupt the soil food web. And obviously, we've talked a great deal about how mechanical disturbance, such as tillage, can disrupt the physical system. That's not to say that any one thing is bad. Everything is a tool and has its place. It's just if it's used appropriately, that's really what we're trying to incentivize. We're not trying to villainize anything. And I just wanted to be clear. I think if I'm correct, Helen, correct me here, but I think there's only one thing, and it's in a grazing form where you actually get negative points. And I think that's just in the drought section, where if you've been in a declared drought and you haven't done anything about it, then you lose 1 point. So obviously certain things like, you know, it's not that chemicals and pesticides and herbicides are villainized, right? You don't lose points for using those things. You just don't get as many points if you use something else. And then likewise, if there's a pest management plan, integrated pest management plan, for example, you get points there. So so all of these things are important. Plant diversity increases resource use efficiency, rooting depths, variable water use along the profile, and diversity above ground usually means diversity below ground, which is always a good thing. Continual living root, I think, is really important. I think that's where we're going to start to see research show that that's really where we're going to start picking up our carbon, feeding those soil microbes, which has a really good impact on the soil structure, right? The microbes produce a lot of waste material and glue that kind of helps cement things together. And that's really kind of what helps drive a lot of this aggregate stability we're talking about in the structure in the soil. The livestock integration is important because your residue above ground is usually somewhere between 60 and 120 parts of carbon per 1 nitrogen. It's not super readily usable. If you graze that carbon and nitrogen ratio drops as soon as it comes out the back end of that grazer. So that's kind of the philosophy behind the 5 soil health principles, how they impact your soil. That's a very brief discussion, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of context. So understanding that, right, then that allows us to pick which practices might fit the field, which principles would be easiest to implement, and what are the most difficult. And as we get into later in the STAR forms, you'll notice a distinction between practice and principle, right? And as you start advancing in the soil health journey, you go from individual acts of practices to this idea where you're accepting or you're practicing things more holistically, and you're actually looking at principles, integrating principles instead of just simple practices across the operation. That said, there are barriers, right? What are the constraints? 37% of all agriculture in the United States is now no-till or minimal till. I wish that were 100% from a soil science perspective, right? Because this physical disturbance is just really bad on the structure and the benefits that we'll get from water infiltration and water holding capacity. So, but what are the constraints, right? Going to no-till can be very expensive. I know I've spoken specifically with one person here today who, if you were going to go no-till on a large corn operation, I mean, you'd be north of $1 million. That's a heavy investment. So again, if you go back to the scoring sheets, it really will tell you, where your low-hanging fruit is, and what practices and principles might take a little bit more time and money and effort to implement. And then, describing the plan for this field for the coming growing season, right? That's just sort of that short-term plan that kind of helps you fit everything together. So that brings us to the next steps. And this is the end of your consultation form. What does the conservation district need to do, and what does the producer need to do? And the conservation district, while you're out doing the consultation, the way we kind of saw it would be while you're out there, you help them fill out their STAR form after you do the consultation. Soil samples will be taken hopefully at that time and sent off to Ward Labs. That'll be kind of your morning or half day or whatever that takes you. And then I would be remiss if I didn't suggest that having a good conversation with the NRCS, and again, this is the onus of the conservation district. So we don't want to just hand it off to the district conservationist. But it is good to have a conversation with the NRCS, the local office, because part part of this whole process is, you know, getting people ready for integrating into NRCS programs like EQIP and other things like that. Our budget is limited, but these are kind of the first steps of getting a conservation plan kind of together, having these goals set and the understanding of the operation. And these are all things that can kind of work synergistically with the NRCS. I will probably say it again, but I would like to say that, you know, the practices, if they're working with the NRCS on this field that's chosen and they're getting paid for a certain practice, they'll have to choose a different practice for our program. They can't be paid twice for the same thing. So if somebody's getting, you know, cover cropping money, they'll have to look at something a little bit different. And then obviously for the producer, right, it's the implementation, gathering the receipts, keeping good records, you know, calculating all that and getting their contributions. So there will be a little bit between the conservation and the producer here, just producer match forms and making sure that everybody gets paid on time, and that those forms get turned in when they're needed to be turned in. So that's sort of conservation districts in it, or consultation forms in a nutshell. And I would love to take some questions right now if anybody has any. And I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that do, so please ask those questions. Nobody has questions on consultation forms?
Ryan, this is Bill. I'll put my video on. That your presentation basically came off the STAR Plus program consultation form for farms. And this is just a minor thing, but the last page on part 4, you're supposed to tear it in half and leave the producer's steps with them. And then how to, I guess we probably ought to copy what the producer's steps are going to be so that we kind of know when we follow up, huh? Instead of just tearing this page in half and leaving it with them. Maybe take 2 copies or something.
Yeah. Whatever works best. Whatever works best for you. We are working on printable versions, and we'll get into that a little bit here with the STAR forms and scoring sheets. But yeah, whatever you think is going to work best for you and your producers. I guess the reason why we had it to tear in half was just so that the producer had something that kind of gave them some guidance going forward. Obviously, all these will be available electronically. So if you wanted to share that with them, that would be something that you could do as well.
Thank you.
Okay. So I don't, it looks like there's questions in the chat.
Casey Green is asking more of a procedural question about when producers get paid, and does it have to be reimbursed at one time, or can it be if as practices are implemented? And we want to be specific on that as we answer it, and I think Nikki's going to address that question.
Well,
I can take a stab at it as well. The up to $5,000 incentive payments is intended to be every year for 3 years. It's admittedly a little bit more complicated than that, depending on what grant pool you're in. Because some of this funding is coming from stimulus funds, it depends on which grant you're receiving the money from, excuse me. But yes, the intention is to provide up to $5,000 per year per producer each year for 3 years.
And then I believe, Nikki, did you want to talk about when those producer match forms are due by and how those fundings will be discharged?
Yeah, so there isn't a like hard deadline for those producer match forms because it's really up to when you can meet with them, right? And get the information and collect the whatever receipts or match they might have to submit to us. So we will pay you, the conservation district or the entity, as soon as you send those in to us. And then it's up to you to, of course, then pay the producer their portion of that match. So there's not a set deadline, except for this year, we do have to get that stimulus money spent by October 1st. So we will need the forms October 1st of this year for this year's payments.
Vanessa, you had your hand up?
Yeah, Ryan, you mentioned, I guess I'm thinking about overlap with EQIP, and I think, it's been answered a couple times. Yes, it can overlap with EQIP, but just reiterating, I'm just asking for clarification about if EQIP's already paying for cover crop, then STAR will not be paying for cover crop. Is that accurate?
Right, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so if they're, just so we can be wildly different. If their EQIP is paying for their cover crop, then they have to pick like no-till, for example, right? They can't be paid for the same thing under both programs. But yes, they can. So if they're doing 2 practices, right? If they would like to do 2 practices and they're already getting paid for that cover crop, then we can layer on top of that. It just cannot be the same practice.
Okay, so we will have to know intimately what their EQIP contract looks like and work closely with our DC so we're not overlapping.
Yeah, and I think that's where having those conversations with the DC is important to make sure that there isn't any overlap or double payment. And then obviously, the consultation with the producer that's part of it, right? What fields do you have in NRCS programs and what are you getting paid for would be good questions to ask.
Right. And most of the time, the producer knows the answers to those questions.
Most of the time, yes. So it looks like Rocky had asked, where would we find historical records, examples of where things like no-till has worked? No-till has worked everywhere, but it doesn't look the same in every location, if that makes sense. I would say, again, this is where your DC and folks at the NRCS and Extension are going to play a big role. If folks are interested, NRCS and Extension have a lot of that historical data and gobs and gobs of experience about what works in which area.
Well, we're not asking you to find a historian or give historical information about what's worked in the region. We're asking you just to talk with the producer personally to see what's worked on their operation.
Correct. Right. Is that on the same field or different variable? Joe, were you asking specifically about what Vanessa was asking about?
Can you repeat what you just said? I can't hear you always very clearly.
Yes. So Joe, it could be either or. If a field is in an NRCS program, for example, they're getting paid for cover cropping, they can still use that same field, but they would have to have a different practice other than cover cropping in this program to get paid for that practice on that same field. Essentially, you can't have NRCS paying them for cover cropping and then asking CDA to pay them for the same thing. We don't want to pay them twice for the same practice. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's okay. So the question is, what about a different farm? Many producers have multiple farms. Yeah, so that would be fine. You know, if let's say they have 3 different farms that I wanted to go to, you know, a 2-species cool season winter hardy cover crop. You know, we still only pay the, you know, up to the $75 per acre to a maximum amount of $5,000. But if that $5,000 is going, you know, over 3 years, is going to be something that reduces those, you know, like maybe an additional seed to the cover crop or something like that, then absolutely, yeah. I don't see any restrictions there as far as having multiple farms. Are there any other questions?
It's not really a question, but just a comment, and I already put it in the chat, but with the NRCS, like fast cover crop initiative they're rolling out like right now, I am worried that that's going to knock out some of our big acreage opportunities for STAR, and we'll just have to deal with it. I guess it's good for producers either way, but could provide challenges for us implementing and getting all the acres we need.
Do you have a list of prospective practices fundable? Like, can we use it for compost extract? Can we use it for compost? Or are you honing in on most specifically cover crop seed?
Yeah, so Patrick, and everybody got a welcome packet, and in that welcome packet is a document that kind of goes over, you know, what are acceptable practices, and it's included but not limited to. A large part of that list, right, came from the NRCS, because why reinvent the wheel? But there are a handful of things on there that aren't necessarily quote NRCS approved, and we are, you know, constantly look. The philosophy behind this is that the producers really drive the best management practices. So if there's something out there that should be on the list, we're really willing to talk about that and have that be driven from the bottom up. It hasn't been fully developed and vetted yet, but there is going to be an annual process by which, you know, we take feedback from the producers and the conservation districts that are discharging this, and we adjust the best management practice list to include those things that are working in areas. So when you first look at it and you say, wow, this looks a lot like the NRCS list, that's because it does. But there are practices on there that we approve that are, we don't want to be NRCS light. We really want to be doing things that farmers are already doing. They're the leaders who are out there doing this stuff where they've seen good positive responses. And so I hope that answers that question. Yes, there is a list. It should have come with your welcome packet. But we are open to expanding that list of best management practices and having that be driven by the producers. And that's a really good point you made, Vanessa. I had not considered that. But there's, you know, I mean, cover cropping is only one aspect. Hopefully we can identify some other things that'll work in conjunction with cover cropping or something like that with all the dollars that are coming out.
Max, Ryan, should I begin talking about the STAR overview? And maybe if some of these questions keep coming up, we can answer them in the questions section at the end of this as well.
Yeah. Did I
Agreed.
effectively stop you sharing my screen?
I stopped you.
Nice.
Great. Thanks everyone for being here. I know a lot of the names out in the crowd, so it's great to be with you again today. I'm going to give a brief overview of the STAR program. This will be review for a lot of you, but then I'll be going into some of the details around the STAR field forms and scoring sheets and how different things were weighted and organized. And hopefully that'll respond to some of the questions that have come up a little earlier today. So I think you all know that STAR stands for Saving Tomorrow's Agriculture Resources. STAR is a free and voluntary tool. I really want to emphasize the fact that it is a tool here. So really STAR is an opportunity to work with the producer in conjunction with the consultation to identify practices that they would be open to or that would work on their farm to help improve soil health. It is a good metric of helping producers to assess where they are on their soil health journey. Completing the STAR forms, as you know, will be part of your producer consultation. And depending on the flow of your consultation, it may be helpful to walk a producer through the STAR scoring sheet first. I'll show how to do that in a second, just again to provide a full suite of the practices that may be available on their particular field or for their crop type. We also mentioned that STAR is really hopefully going to work synergistically with the research parts of the program. We're really hoping to be able to marry the economic analysis of what these practices have along with the soil health outcomes. So in 3 years and cumulatively after that, we'll be able to provide robust information on how much these management practices cost, what soil health outcomes they have in a given region to producers. So why did we choose STAR as a really foundational part of the Colorado Department of Agriculture Soil Health Program? First, it rewards producer effort for doing the right thing. This is really important. I think we all know that outcomes are largely unpredictable and also outside the control of the producers. We saw that with the 5 soil health forming factors: climate, time, et cetera. Again, a lot of those are outside of the control of the producer. It's scientifically rigorous. We spent about a year with a diverse committee of scientists, producers, NRCS, and lots of others. Folks here on this call were involved in that, developing these forms for almost every type of production in Colorado. And we really did take this cropland production type by production type, and I'll walk through some of those. For instance, potatoes were considered very differently than wheat fields. It's flexible and adaptable. So there's lots of ways to skin the cat, or lots of tools available to the producers to improve their soil health. There are no prohibitions. For instance, it was mentioned earlier in the call about synthetic inputs, nitrogen fertilizers, or perhaps pesticides or fungicides. STAR really does not prohibit any one tool. Rather, it looks at how that tool is being used within the suite of practices on that particular field. It encourages experimentation and continual improvement. One of the things that's really wonderful about STAR for croplands is that it's field-based. So producers are encouraged to enter a lower risk situation by trying a practice on a given field, but not for their whole operation. I do want to note that grazing lands is a bit of an exception to this particular point, and we'll talk a little bit more about why grazing lands differs from croplands. It's an annual process too, so producers will hopefully see, as they accrue different practices, a continual improvement in their STAR rating. We do hope that STAR is not overly burdensome for producers or administrators. A field form should take not more than 20 to 30 minutes for a producer and a conservation district to fill out with that producer. Of course, that really depends on how well a producer knows their operation. So that might be one thing to prepare a producer for when you go into your consultation. These forms are submitted via the internet and scored by CDA. So again, that takes a lot of that burden off of you all. Finally, and I think very importantly, STAR is growing nationally, as has been mentioned. It is growing across the Midwest, and a lot of other Western states have expressed interest in adopting this program. And with all of that momentum, there really is a potential for it to evolve into a market signal. We've had some preliminary conversations with supply chain partners on this, and we're going to continue those conversations in the future. You might get asked by your producers, what are the benefits? Well, if you're in STAR Plus, they'll be receiving matching grants. They'll be receiving technical assistance, which I'll talk about in a little while. And of course, soil health benefits and the potential for market signals as well. I will note that for us to be able to really push the needle on market signals, it's important for us to have a growing amount of acres under STAR. So STAR is a 5-step process. The producer completes the field form for a given crop field in a given crop year. Points are assigned on the scoring sheet. For croplands, they really are based on the 5 soil health principles that we've gotten to talk a lot about today. Ryan will talk about how this how the STAR form does differ from grazing lands and really focuses on the decision making and monitoring for grazing lands. In both types of forms, we want to reward a producer using their universal tools for soil health, and the best universal tool that grazers have is their decision making. Forms are submitted via internet to CDA for scoring, and then the producer will receive their STAR rating and a field sign. For producers outside of STAR Plus, there will be a random verification process. CDA is developing that now. So how is STAR ratings assigned? A 1-star is a field that we say is practices similar to what 80% of fields are doing in that region, but really it's a field that hasn't begun its soil health journey. 2 stars is a really great start. It's a field that has maybe begun to use 1 or 2 practices that pertain to the soil health principles. And we move all the way up to 5 stars. We call this an ideal field. What it really means is that a producer is using multiple practices that are consistent with all 5 soil health principles. Again, I want to note that that this does not mean that the producer has to be organic. You can achieve a 5-star rating with the use of synthetic inputs, and potato producers and sugar beet growers can also be 5 stars. So we worked hard over the past year to develop 11 field forms and scoring sheets that cover hopefully all of the production types in Colorado. I think that there's at least 1 missing. The 2 that are being developed this month are orchards and vineyards. So if you all have folks that you'll be working with in that production type, just reach out to me or Ryan. And also non-alfalfa perennial hayland will be posted shortly. This is just a reminder of the STAR for individual producers that we hope you'll promote in your districts. So any questions on kind of the philosophy of STAR, the general reasons, the general framework? Okay, great. So Max has just put into the chat the the Colorado Department of Agriculture Soil Health website, which is where I'm going to go right now. So I think most of you know this, but to access the STAR forms, producers will just click on this blue banner. And I think we're going to start by showing you the how a producer will fill the STAR form out. The only required field on the Google form for most producers is the email. So once they've submitted their email, read the instructions, and acknowledged the confidentiality clause, and stated that to the best of their knowledge everything is true, they can click next and proceed through the form. The one thing on the form that we ask producers in the STAR Plus program to be sure to answer, if possible, is to insert a longitude and latitude of the selected field. I will note that we are working on getting printable versions of the Google form. I know I can speak for Ryan and me that we have struggled quite often when we were doing field visits with the form on how to show this to producers. What I like to do, it's not a perfect solution, is simply to go to my print function, save it as a PDF, and print it out. It will end up being quite a few pages, I think 27 pages or so, but there's only 1 or 2 questions on each page. And there also may be some other issues, for instance, words getting cut off. It's not a perfect solution. Again, we are trying to rectify that. So going to the scoring sheet might be the best way for us to explore how we structured the STAR field forms and scoring sheets. This particular form is for annual grasses, grains, and legume crops. Annual grasses, of course, include corn. So this is going to get a large part of your production, including wheat, peas, corn, etc. So the first section of the form is really general information, non-scored, things that will be helpful to us in the future as we take this private data and potentially aggregate it to come to some general conclusions around soil health in a given region. If you guys are having trouble seeing my screen, you can also click on the CDA Soil Health website and follow along there. The next section that really gets into the substance of the soil health principles is about irrigation and salinity sodicity management. This is actually not an issue that's present in all areas of Colorado. So here you would get a no for 2 points. If you have a yes, you get 0 points. But then again, you can make up those points that you would lack by having appropriate management practices. Soil armor takes up the next couple of sections, and you can see that we've really thought through the different types of practices that you might have to protect from wind erosion. Artificial mulch here really means this, plastic mulch. This was something that had come up in a different venue. Here is another example of a place where you can get negative points. That question came up. So if you have sloped land and you have, for the sloped land section, if you have a flat field, you get a point. But if you have a sloped field, we're going to prioritize certain types of shaping of land. So smoothing, you get a -1 because of the disturbance to the soil. The next is cover crops and living mulch. Reduced disturbance is a place where producers will pick up a lot of points. We are heavily incentivizing no type of tilling in the past couple of seasons. This particular section, you're answering for tillage over the past 2 years. We had a lot of producer feedback about how most programs do not incentivize or recognize the fact that no-till operated over a very long period of time has significant soil health benefits. And so that is something we're incentivizing here additionally. So if you've been in no-till 3 to 5 years or above, you'll get additional points there. A similar framework exists for reduced till as well. For nutrient management, we have provided a wide variety of practices that are available and ranked them according to the best science around their soil health impacts. So for instance, you can see that slow release fertilizer has you receive a 0.5, whereas compost and manure and biosolids, you will get a 1 point. No synthetic fertilizers, you will get 1 point, consistent with the soil health principles. We also cover pest control strategies here. Chemical pesticides, I know this is something that's probably on everybody's mind. 0 points are awarded for chemical pesticides, which means you're not penalized, but you're also not gaining points. But seed treatments, given the science around their effect on soil biology, you are getting a -1. Again, this won't make or break a star rating as you progress through the form, but it is a recognition of those impacts. Plant diversity is obviously an important section. And one thing I do want to note is that we are asking about families of crop types, not distinct crops. So we do provide information on crop families, both in the Google Sheet and here. But for instance, you would not say 3 families or more if you planted corn, sorghum, wheat, rye, all in a row. They have to be a different family. So it would something that would qualify for 3 families or more would be corns, beans, sugar beets, and sunflowers. And of course, continual living root is a challenge in Colorado, and we want to recognize that. So we give percentages for points for different percentages of time. And livestock integration, this was definitely a tricky principle to incorporate, but we did our best. And one of the reasons it was tricky is not everybody has the opportunity to incorporate livestock. They may not have it near their field. One thing that we are focusing on is how animals are treated with wet ground and whether folks are using stocking rates and the percentage of utilization. So one thing to note on this annual grasses, grains, and legumes scoring sheet is that we actually have a different scaling for irrigated versus dry land. Again, soil health practices and principles can be a little harder to achieve on dry land, and so we wanted to accommodate for that. There was a question about 5-star potatoes or sugar beets, both of which require some disturbance. I won't go into detail in depth on this, but you can see that it does follow the same basic structure as the previous sheet, although we are incentivizing tillage a little bit differently, and the scaling as well as pest control strategies, plant diversity, and continual living root. And the scale is significantly different. Here, the scale is only 65 points. So it's easier for you to get to a 5-star, again, recognizing that many of these crop types are going to have to use tillage. So I'll stop there and let folks ask questions. Yeah, Vanessa.
Sorry, I always have a lot of questions. So there's the Google form that the producers fill out.
Yeah.
With or without the conservation district staff. But then the scoring sheet, is that done entirely behind the scenes by like someone else? Or I guess I'm not sure who fills in the numbers on this sheet that we're looking at right here.
That is going to be the lucky job of Ryan and other soil health coordinators that we'll be hiring in the near future. So you all will be able to get a sense of where folks are at and how they might improve their soil health score and get ideas for different practices, but the actual scoring will be done behind the scenes.
And there's nothing subjective about that. They're 100% taking what producers answered and just transferring some numbers onto that form.
That's correct.
Okay.
And I just want to follow up on something Ryan mentioned, that a lot of work went into these, but we know they're not perfect, and we know that there are practices that producers have innovated around that we're going to want to add in the coming years. So this is kind of a first round, if you will, of what the STAR forms would look like. A lot of these practices, however, we're fairly confident in their soil health impacts.
And then just thinking through this from the producer standpoint, so when we're sitting down with them, they're going to say, what's my STAR rating? And I'm going to say, I'll get back to you in a certain amount of time when the state tells us what your score is.
There's nothing to keep you from scoring it. I guess that's the point, Vanessa, is you can, I mean, you or the producer or together or separate can sit down and score it. It's there, like I said, there's nothing subjective about it. You're just going to take, do they have a nutrient management plan? Yes or no, right? They get a point for that. And so you should be able to go through the answers and score that directly. There should not be any surprises.
Okay.
I mean, if you send something in and you're expecting 75 points and it comes back significantly different, then something wrong happened.
Okay. And then my other, just trying to think through this. So if we have a producer who wants to sugar beet field, right? So we fill out the STAR form, answer all the sugar beet questions, and they get whatever they get, a 2. It's going to be hard in a 3-year time frame to see if they improved, because they're not going to plant sugar beets on the same field next year. So there'll be like different, you'll be filling out a different STAR form each year based on the rotation. So the STAR rating may go up or down for that crop, but doesn't really mean that, I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah, and we've anticipated that, which is why we're asking about the 2 years encompassing it. So you're getting a general rating for that field. What you're really like probably focusing on here is the primary crop type in the coming year. Ryan, do you want to jump in and maybe explain that less clumsily than I did? You're on mute, Ryan.
Sorry, I was responding to some stuff in the chat. What was the question?
If a producer has planted sugar beets this past year, they're not likely going to be planting sugar beets again this coming year. And so how does the STAR form assess for that?
Yeah, so we tried to make it so that the field was assessed annually on the crops that you're going to be growing, right? The one caveat to that, I guess, that I see is well, that could be the deep tillage, right, lasts for 2 years, but everything else should basically be on, you know, what you're doing this year and what your management practice is. So on the year that you grew sugar beets, again, like Helen has said, you're scored on it's a sliding scale, right? Because sugar beets is X, Y, and Z. I mean, look, in an ideal world, Vanessa, what I'd like to see is minimal or no till, you know, in the rest of the rotation, so that when you get back to sugar beets, or, you know, if everybody's going to have to till at some point, right? The idea that you're going to be in no-till for the rest of time is just, it's not accurate, right? So when you do have to go to those deep tillage or, you know, invasive techniques, if you've had a good rest period for the soil where aggregation can build up and strengthen and structure can form, then those disturbances have less of an impact than if you're constantly tilling multiple times every year. So it should just be, if they were in sugar beets last year, they were scored on a 65-point sliding scale according to that sugar beet form. And if they're going to be in, you know, corn this year, then they'll use a different form, and they'll be assessed based on the practices for that year's management practices. Does that help?
And the instructions, we should have clarified this, I'm sorry, that say, you please complete this for activities beginning immediately after harvest in 2020 to after harvest in 2021. So we're really looking at that complete year cycle, with the exception of some of the questions that go beyond, like tillage. That will encompass that 2-year cycle.
Vanessa, did we answer that question effectively?
Yes, and I guess it's just sort of a fundamental philosophy with how STAR is set up, looking at it from year to year rather than like a fully integrated systems approach, regardless of crop. But this is how it's set up, so this is what we're going with. So
let's
I got it.
let's be fair, okay? Play nice, Vanessa. This is year 0, okay? I mean, it would be really hard to play, you know, to just step into, let's look at the last 5 or 10 years of history, right? Not saying it would be disingenuous to say that we couldn't do that, but given the fact that we're all at different levels of understanding of these different systems, right? It would be even more onerous on the producers and the conservation districts to discharge the program if we had to get into that. I'm hoping that as we, over the next 3 years, we all get used to the system, how it works, communication and workflows, things like that. Over time, that's exactly what we'll probably start morphing things into, is looking at, you know, more long-term rotational things, and looking at the system as a whole as opposed to just year on year. But given where we're at, we had to kind of start somewhere. So although it's imperfect, that's kind of, yeah, you're right. That's what we're dealing with.
So we're still confused. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We fill out the field form. We send it in and Ryan fills out the score sheet?
That's correct.
All right.
However, Ryan and Vanessa have brought up really good points. That you can score the field form or the scoring sheet on your own. It's, you know, you could just tally up the points by highlighting what the producer has chosen. So if I were sitting down with a producer, I could start with, you know, having printed out the scoring sheet and going through question by question as they fill out the Google form. Yes, I have indication of salinity, sodicity problems. I'd highlight that, put it in a calculator, and then maybe how I manage it. And I can just add up the points that way so the producer can get a rough guess of their scoring. Again, though, in the interest of also lessening your burdens, you don't have to do that.
All right, we've got it.
So
there was a question about, should you start with the consultation form or the STAR scoring sheets, field forms and scoring sheets?
So I think this is going to be an iterative process. I would definitely start with the consultation forms to get that general sense of where they are at in their soil health journey, and then going through the STAR field form and scoring sheet might add to that conversation and highlight practices that they want to or could try. So for instance, with nutrient management, they might decide, oh, well, I disc in my inputs right now. Maybe I'd like to stop doing that, or maybe I don't use split applications for fertilizers. Maybe that's a good practice for me to try. So really, again, this is why STAR is a good tool to spur conversation around the practices available to producers to try. Because there are a lot of practices on here besides cover crops and no-till.
Yeah, and I just, so what I kind of added in the chat was that, you know, I would start with the consultation forms first, with the caveat that they're familiar with the material before you get there. Right. And so if they have a chance to fill out the forms and go through the scoring sheets and stuff like that before you get there, that would be beneficial. If they could go through the consultation form as well and be thinking about I guess what I'm saying is, the better prepared they are for when you show up, the better. If you show up and they're cold and they haven't been exposed to any of this material, that could be a long consultation, right?
I
Because there
think
would be
it's
a
still,
lot of,
I do still think it's not a bad thing. If they haven't done their homework ahead of time, the consultation form is really structured in the way I look at it as just a beginning conversation. It gives you some really good discussion points to start. It's a starting place, and so whether or not they've gone through all the forms, you're going to get there. And it's, some of these people are people you know, some of them may be people you don't know, but at least it helps frame the discussion. And I think that's what everybody needs or would like to have, is just something to frame the discussion around. And then after you do the consultation, then you work into the field forms where this is the nuts and bolts of what you're doing. And because you've had such a good positive conversation with the initial consultation, I see it just kind of going hand in hand, if you don't mind me saying.
Just to give a real clear answer, there's two things that really need to get done for this first consultation. One is the consultation form needs to get filled out. When you turn those in, that's when you get your $2,000 per producer. And the second thing that needs to happen at this first point of contact with the producer is filling out the STAR field form. Those are the two things that need to happen in the first consultation. Hope that clears things up.
Nancy, are you good on that now?
Oh, yeah, I said yes, but I was muted.
Okay, sounds good.
So I think Ryan was going to review STAR for grazing lands if we have time.
yeah, where are we at, Max? Did we want to take a break, or did we just want to go right into it?
I think we should go right into it. This is the last section before we break out into some breakout rooms so that there's smaller forums to ask some questions.
Okay. Okay, so STAR for grazing lands is necessarily different, given the fact that plants don't move around the landscape. So these become a little more convoluted. Here, I'll give an abbreviated version, and I I will go fairly quickly so that we can get you guys out and through your day. We will have, there is a grazing land specific training that'll be happening that you'll see later here in the slides. I just think, you know, managing a thinking animal that moves around the landscape makes for a not necessarily more challenging, but different, and much more difficult to score. So STAR for grazing lands is really focused more on the process of decision making and incentivizes planning, monitoring, and adaptive decision making. So when we've been through 3 iterations of grazing lands, and you know, when we first came at this, we were trying to look at practices, and realizing that practices from day to day, week to week, year to year were so fluid depending on where you were and what the weather was doing and how your land was responding and all that stuff. We kind of left the practice base behind and focused on a process-based system. And so this deviates a little bit from the cropping lands and what you might see in Illinois, for example. But this really allows us to assess, you know, the largest agricultural systems in the state, right? The rangelands and grazing lands that you know, our Colorado cattle call home. And I think that ultimately this will be the tool that takes STAR into the arid West, where, you know, it otherwise would be hampered. Like Helen had mentioned before, this is consistent with the STAR goal of rewarding producer effort. You know, these are really diverse and difficult to assess year on year, month on month. But you know, we can do everything right, and if it doesn't rain, it's really difficult. And so we didn't want to make things punitive, and the easiest way to do that is kind of looking at, is there a reference site nearby? And so that's sort of when we get into grazing lands, more of the training later. We'll be talking about things like land PKS and how do we assess what the range looks like, not compared to somebody else or something else, but to that area, right? For example, we had some incredible monsoon flows middle of last year. It didn't affect the entire state. So, you know, given that, it would be hard to look at Northeast Colorado and Southeast Colorado and, you know, let's say South Central Colorado and try and compare 3 different ranches, given the diversity of the climate last year across the state. And unlike the STAR for croplands, we really can apply this across the whole operation. We at CDA focus on the privately held stuff, right? The leases that folks have on state forests and federal lands and things of BLM land, things of that nature. We would hope that everything that we're doing in STAR meshes with you know, we don't want to uproot somebody's management plan for BLM, for example. And so hopefully we can get these to mesh together. That would be the ideal. This came together with a lot of hard work and a lot of people involved. It was developed by a committee of rangeland specialists from the USDA, NRCS, ARS, CSU Extension, soil scientists, state agencies, consultants, and producers with additional feedback. We had more than 10 producers involved, just in the committee alone. And then Helen and I, you know, thousands of miles under the tires and hundreds of hours later, we had visited 8 ranches. Each consultation took somewhere between 3 and 4 hours, just getting feedback from ranchers across the state as far as what questions should we be asking, what should we be focused on. In this outreach program that we had, that's when, you know, one big change came on day one. Going into it, we were looking at monitoring as more of a long-term goal-oriented type deal. How is this gonna influence your decision-making over time? And what we quickly found out was that, producers are making decisions day to day, and moving animals accordingly. So that every time we went out and spoke with somebody, we refined it until we had less edits coming back. Some of the people that we had on the outreach were, Nick Charchalis, who's a CACD board member, Philip Anderson from Colorado Cattlemen's. We had a Leopold Conservation Award winner, a Crowley County rancher, who, as we all know, that's a dry county, and Robbie LaValle, who for years, has been so involved in ranching and ranching education. We obviously couldn't talk to everybody, but we talked to a lot of people, trying to get this all metered out in a good way. So we'll go through the major sections for star grazing lands, which includes the management plan, the grazing plan, record keeping, drought management, drought preparedness and response, and monitoring. The additional training for STAR is going to be on February 10th from 2 to 4, and we'll be sending out an invitation for that. So the management plan really guides our overall decision making, and whether that's a full-blown NRCS conservation plan that's written, typed out, all that stuff, we decided didn't have to be necessary, right? Codifying it, writing things down, even if it's on the back of a napkin, is still really beneficial and powerful for when people have to make decisions. And I can't remember who Helen attributed it to, but she's often fond of saying, you want to make your drought plan when it's raining outside, right? You don't want to be overly emotional when it comes to that stuff, and thinking clearly helps out when times do get tight. And so what we heard from producers was, if you can have that stuff written down, that'll just leave you in a better place to make decisions later on down the road. We do incentivize a written management plan, although it's not necessary. If you go through the grazing land forms, which I believe should be up or will be up soon, we do incentivize the written form, but that doesn't mean that there aren't any points allowed for folks that just, have a history and do it by memory. So another thing that we really incentivize in the written plan is who's involved, what the monitoring protocol is, your resource inventory, and the time of last review. And I think what we're looking for there is, if your written management plan was written by, a consultant, for example, but nobody else was involved, we run across on a couple of occasions where, folks just don't know what's in their conservation plan or their management plan. And some were even unaware that they had certain documents. And so NRCS was really helpful with that, because they do take very good records. What they found was that, when they reached out to their NRCS office, a lot of these things were available to them that they didn't realize was available to them. So again, as we start this conversation, part of it is, what do you have, and where do I go get those documents, because they might already exist. But the important takeaway there is that even non-written plans can still get points. And again, who's involved and things of that nature. Property mapped, really, we've seen everything from, ArcGIS maps to things that have been handwritten, maps that were drawn out on large pieces of like butcher paper and stuff like that. So, your monitoring protocol, your resource inventory, and how often you review your management plan. These are all really important. And if we were to go through the scoring sheet, you would see how those all ranked out. Within the management plan, usually there's a grazing plan, right? That's important, helps us determine, stocking rates and duration and all that. We're heavily incentivizing a written grazing plan and grazing plans in general. like the management plan, there doesn't need to be a particular format. The resource inventory is of great importance. The process to assess land health, we will go through more at the next training, but use of the reference condition is ideal, and that's really what allows us to assess that land, right? Again, we want to be comparing, you know, something up in Colorado First to something that's nearby in Colorado First, as opposed to something that's, you know, in the Purgatory Spanish Peaks, for example, right? Different systems and need to be assessed differently. So it's important that we use those reference sites where available. Your periods of grazing, deferment, and yearly review of your grazing plan are really important. And the monitoring plan that comes later is critical in helping you make those decisions in your grazing plan prior to actually being in the season. And then again, timing of the last review, you know, there is this temporal component. You know, have you updated things since 1992 or 2001? You know, year on year, things have gotten a little bit drier, and you know, species might have changed. Droughts might be a little bit longer where you're at. All those things are going to affect your monitoring plan. And then the frequency of adjusting the grazing schedule, taking all these tools into account and making those decisions where necessary. Again, there's still points that can be assessed and processes to assess land health, even if things aren't written down. Record keeping, why it's important. What happened 10 years ago can have an impact. You know, Ava, one of the things we talked about earlier, we were talking about soil building and soil loss. You know, many of the ranches I've been to, especially in the mountains of Colorado, were denuded by sheep 100 years ago. And so the A horizon in the soil is gone. The carbon just didn't disappear, right? The soil actually left the site, right? Without anything holding it in place. Those rain events and those snow events and the wind actually just pulled it off the soil surface and moved it into the rivers and streams and lakes and blew it to Kansas and all types of things. But you know, what took place over the course of probably decades is going to take thousands of years to replace, right? Now, that's not to say we can't have a positive impact on the landscape. It's just saying that A horizon that might have been this thick will take thousands of years to rebuild. So, but we can still make positive impacts on our soil and get better infiltration and aggregation and build carbon and things like that and start to, you know, supercharge that process. But it's important. Record keeping is important because it allows us to look back and say, you know, this is what we used to do. This is how things were. Maybe things are changing. Maybe things are static. But you know, as technology changes, as we age, as the pastures and rangelands age, you know, we can keep track of that a little bit better. Keep track of species that come and go and make decisions accordingly. Plus, record keeping is just good business management, right? If we wanted to, we can use a lot of this stuff that we're putting together. If somebody isn't already involved in NRCS programs, this is a really good start to that seamless integration of, you know, NRCS programs that just are better funded. They have a lot more money. And we're trying to find those little spaces between where we can fit in and maximize our impact, not try and replace what the NRCS is already doing. Types of records that are incentivized. I think in most of our sheets, we're looking for, you know, 1 or 2 records. You know, it might be a grazing plan, might be a management plan, might be weather data, could be a map. The more of those that they have, the better scores that they get. Maintenance and infrastructure, all that type of stuff. The next section would be drought management. That's important, and I think I touched on that. Having a plan in place, having those trigger dates so that when it's actually happening, you have something to follow that you can feel good about. We are incentivizing, again, a written drought plan. And who was involved the last time it was reviewed. All these, there's some redundancy here, but what we're looking at is, you know, why do you do what you do? What motivates you to make changes? What motivates you to, you know, keep the status quo? And when these things are written down, it, you know, the science proves out that, you know, when people make a plan and have a plan to follow, they make better decisions when things start to go awry. And again, there's still points available for an unwritten drought management plan. Drought preparedness and response. You know, this, I just wanted to put this in here because I think this is our only negative point value on the grazing land side of things. It just, there was, you know, -1 point if you weren't responsive in an active declared drought. But drought preparedness is important. You know, you don't want to be waiting to go fix your leaky pipes and your leaky water tanks when water's scarce. You want to make sure that that's all done so that, you know, when water is limited, you can make the best use out of it possible. And monitoring is really the big thing, both long-term and short-term. You know, it influences decision-making, and it tells the producer if what they're doing is working. You know, again, it's only by understanding what's come before that we can make those decisions going forward. And, you know, meeting with the producers that we met with, they were just wonderful. And learning how they decide what they're going to do when they decide it was really unique in every single instance. And how each one of them built resilience into their system was unique as well. So, you know, how does monitoring fit into your goals, both short-term and long-term, right? Ranchers will tell you they're making decisions day to day, right? They need to move animals. They need to watch their utilization and forage supply versus their demand. That they're looking at animal behavior, right? Are the animals laying down, enjoying what they ate? Are they at the gate ready to move? You know, there's all types of deals that these producers are using to determine their you know, day-to-day, week-to-week goals. And so that short-term monitoring is important. The long-term monitoring, the interpreting indicators, the rangeland health or CRMI, line point intercept, things like that, those can really tell us long-term, you know, what's trending in the system. Maybe they're trying to improve ground cover, and they can figure that out. Or, you know, one of the producers we were looking at wanted to increase winter fat, so, you know, he came up with a plan to increase winter fat on his range. Monitoring really is the heavy lifter on influencing what the decision making is going to be going forward. And again, this goes back to, you know, you're going to hear it a lot, the reference site, right? What's the reference condition? What does stuff look like in your area so that we can compare apples to apples and not apples to oranges? And I'll wrap that up so that Helen can start with some technical assistance, and we can get wrapped up and get you guys out of here.
Sorry about that, guys. So we realize that this is a lot to ask of you all, and what we have done is to create a system where each district is going to be paired with a cropping and a rangeland specialist in their area. We are at the very final stages of finalizing contracts with CSU Extension, as well as CSU Agriculture Experiment Station, which consists of the 11 research centers across the state, to line up professionals to be able to help you as you go through this process with producers. So the people that will be available to you will be extension agents, one BLM agent in particular, some NRCS or former NRCS folks, the scientists who are at the research center, consultants, and semi-retired conservationists. We will be providing you a definitive list by of the people for your district, I would say within the next week or so. And I should clarify that each district will have one cropping specialist and one rangeland specialist. These technical assistance providers will be available to go through 4 consultations total for you. So really, invite them to the initial consultation with the producer. Each cropland specialist will be able to do 2 with you, and each grazing land specialist will be able to do 2 with you. Of course, if you don't have grazing lands, we can talk about how to accommodate your needs. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought Brian was sharing. The other things that the TAPs will help you with during the initial consultations are things like soil sampling. Soil moisture probe installation might come later depending on where you are, but again, they'll be available to help you with installing those moisture probes. They're also going to be critical for answering questions that come up after the initial visit that you have. How do we actually do companion planting without hurting the primary crop might be one that comes up. So you will be able to call your technical assistance provider. One thing that we are hoping to do across these technical assistance providers is really create a referral network. So say the person that is working with the West Otero district really doesn't have a lot of expertise on Nancy's question. They can call another person within this network. Maybe they're from a different region of Colorado, but who will have some experience with that. So again, we're really trying to bring all the resources across the state to help meet your needs. Other assistance that we're going to be providing for you, although not necessarily technical assistance, is office hours. Weekly, starting next Monday at 11 a.m. We'll be holding open office hours where you can come and ask questions. As you heard earlier, there will also be resources being rolled out through Acres USA. They'll be doing the 12 primers on soil health, as well as forums and face group books as well. The CSU Center for Science Communications 3 short films will also hopefully be a resource to you in the future. So are there questions around the technical assistance that will be provided, aside from maybe who's going to be assigned to my district, which we'll be able to notify you of shortly? Great. The last thing I want to make an announcement about, that I believe you all received an email from CDA, is the drought planning that is coming up. This is provided by the Colorado Drought Advisors, Agricultural Drought Advisors, which is a partnership between CSU Extension and other professionals in drought planning to help train the trainers. So what this will really equip you to do is maybe sit down with a producer and help them think through the drought planning process. They'll be having a virtual training February 4th and February 11th and February 18th. And then they'll also have, my apologies, and also on March 4th. And then they'll have 2 in-person trainings depending on where you are located. So if you are on the West Slope, you'd be going to Grand Junction for 2 days, March 8th through 9th. If you're on the eastern side of the state, March 15th through 16th in Morgan County. And I think that concludes our presentation, but I do want to open it up to any questions, any other questions for the entire group before we go into our breakout rooms.
Right on. We are right on schedule.
Fantastic. Nikki or Max, do you want to explain how we'll be going through the breakout rooms?
Sure. So we will have 3 breakouts for this session, and they will be by grant type. So 319, CPP, and SIG. You should have the option as soon as I make them live to choose your room. Some of you have already been pre-assigned. And Vanessa specifically, you can choose which one, and you might be able to go back and forth. So I will open those up right now. And for the rest of you in this main room, were you given the option to choose a breakout room? Nancy, you're assigned to 319. I think you just have to click join.
I didn't see an option.
Oh,
I did
sorry.
not either.
Okay. Vanessa, where do you want to go?
Put me in the SIG. Peyton's gonna go to 319.
You got it.
This is Shanna. Can I get in the SIG?
This is Bill. I have the same request for SIG.
Can I get in 319, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Can I get in SIG?
And Peyton Ward. And I'm not sure the phone number. I know we were having phone issues, but 6323. Not sure who that is either. Or Steve, is there a room you need to go into?
Nikki, can I get 319, please? It's
Yes.
Peyton Ward. Thank you.
There you go.
Hi, this is Steve. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Nope. No, you're good. I'm sorry. I
Okay.
didn't know where to put you.
SIG, please.
Alrighty. Garth, I'm going to dump you in SIG because everybody's going there.
Is there any chance we can have a little bit more time in those groups?
Yeah.